Welcome back to another Empowering Forward Momentum live stream. It looks like I'm having some issues with going live on Facebook, so I guess we just won't be live over there tonight, but we are still live on YouTube and Twitter, so at least we've got that going. Um, Last week, I had Gina Mangello on talking about narrowing down your niche to reach the clients that you want to reach people that you are most empowered by God to help. And it was a really great interview. I had some internet issues last week, and so there was a lot of overlap when she talked and I talked. So I'm having to do some work cleaning up the audio before I can release that on the podcast, but I should have that ready to go tomorrow morning. So if you want to go check that out, you can. Tonight, I've got Norm Welsh on with me, and this is going to be a really fun chat. He's a former police officer, 25 years out in San Francisco, so I'm sure he's got a lot of stories that he can tell us. I don't know what all we'll get into, but it's going to be a fun conversation. The thing that I love about vacation in is talking about how God worked him through trauma. Now, I know everybody has a little bit of trauma here and there in their life, some to a vast degree, some I can't even imagine what they're facing, but everybody has a little bits and pieces here and there that, for some reason or other, we haven't worked through in our life. We're going to talk with Norm tonight about how God has helped him work through that trauma, move past it, and to create something amazing in life. Like when you let God get a hold of you, amazing things happen. But I'm going to let Norm tell his story. So with that, Norm, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ken. Honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was super excited when I saw your application come in. It's not I have never sat down and chatted with a police officer, former or current, like this. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and kind of tell us what brought you, I don't know, up to, up to where you started your book at, like
Okay.
kind of where you got to with that.
Okay. I was started off as an auto mechanic, and I grew up in a Christian family, but like most Christians, we only went to church on Christmas. So I really didn't know anything about God. But I felt that wasn't my calling, right? I felt a calling to be a police officer. So I went on a ride along, and I just loved it. And I decided to do that. But I didn't know what they all have to deal with on a daily basis. It looked so great on TV with all, everything going on, and there's no repercussions or consequences for anything. It was pretty cool. So I became a police officer. I started as a reserve officer in a really small city. And then the city, the neighboring city has a small airport, right? And next to the airport is a shopping mall. Well, I'm working for just a couple months, just starting to get my feet on the ground, and there's a call of an airplane into the shopping mall, and this was December 23rd. So you can imagine the shopping mall was full of people.
Wow.
The plane crashed through the roof, literally 50 yards from where Santa was talking to the kids, and there was a line of kids. Ended up being 14 killed and 74 injured. And that was my indoctrination into what real police work is like. My dad was a military guy, and he taught me my whole life, hey, bury your emotions. Men don't cry. If something happens, you just move forward. Don't dwell on it. And that's what the police academy taught too. Back then this was in 84. There was nothing about PTSD. I didn't even know what PTSD was,
Right.
So that's why I was good at my job, is I was able to just push down those emotions. And so I got a full-time job later on in another neighboring city. And this is all in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I did pretty well, right? I went to traffic and traffic enforcement. That's when you give tickets to all the people for all the things that they do. I didn't have a motorcycle, but I had a car, and it wasn't that fun because of giving the tickets, but it was very traumatic, because you would have to have the responsibility for investigating car crashes. And there's so many crashes and so many people injured, children. I've seen bodies thrown from cars and decapitated people. And it was really, really something. And nothing really bothered me at that point because I put up this big wall. But I knew that I was starting to suffer from some depression. About
And
10
then
years
how
ago,
far into your career would you say this was?
well, I started to feel it around maybe 6 years, but at 10
Okay.
years, I was really deep into depression, and I didn't know why. Right? I messed up my first marriage. That was all my fault. I blamed everyone else but myself, for bad behavior, and just angry, cynical, isolating myself from everything. And I met another woman, and we got married, and she saw it. She said, "Hey, your character is changing, and you really need to seek help." But being a first responder is like, nah, I'm tough. I can handle it. Whatever this is, I can beat it. Don't worry. But you really can't.
If
And about
you're expected to be the front line of defense, it's
yeah.
hard to show
Yeah.
any of that weakness.
Right. And if you do, the police and the fire culture is such where any sign of weakness is a career killer. Right. So if I were to have gone to my boss and said, "Hey, I'm really having some trouble here. I need to talk to somebody," the first thing they do is they put you on admin leave, and they take your gun and your badge, and everybody would know, hey, this guy is mentally ill. We don't want to work with this guy no more. Any sign of weakness, they don't want to work with. And it's not it's not necessary, but I understand it now because you got to be tough, right? You can't go into an armed robbery and start crying. You have to be tough. And so I kept moving forward. In 1998, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was also diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease. There's actually two parts. One is peripheral neuropathy, which a lot of diabetics have. And
Okay.
I'm not a diabetic, but I got that, where that's the deadening of the nerves in your extremities. And then it was complicated with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is a deadening of the muscles in your extremities.
Wow.
So I had two things going on. And what would happen is I get these big blisters, they're called ulcers, on my feet, and I'd have to be casted up, for like 6 weeks to let those wounds heal. Because if you step on those wounds, it doesn't grow, and the wound doesn't close. After a couple of years of that, the doctor started to do surgeries. So I had 30 surgeries in 10 years while I was still working, and it was all on my feet, and I was over 2 a year. And I used up all my sick leave, all my vacation. And luckily, I was well respected, and they allowed me to work light duty. So I'd have to take the time off for the actual surgery, but then I could go into work with the cast on and do, the administrative type work. But during that time, the doctors kept feeding me doctors kept feeding me Vicodin, Percocet, all kinds of pain pills from the surgery. And to be honest, I didn't feel any pain because the nerves were dead in my feet. And I'm not blaming the doctors, because the doctors do have a responsibility to deal with your pain. But what happened was, when I was going through anxiety and panic attacks, I was having nightmares. I was becoming a real basket case. The stress of all the surgeries and stuff was getting to me. And I started to take the pills, not for pain, but for emotional pain. Right. For numbing my emotions, so I wouldn't think of the things that I've seen. Because I mean, if you want, we could go on for hours about the things, and not that I'm anything special. Every police officer, every fireman out there, every paramedic, they witness the most horrific things that Satan can dish out. Right. They just, it's horrible. And that also played into my denial of God. Right. I wasn't agnostic. I was agnostic, not atheist. I knew something was there, but I didn't really believe in God, because how can a kind, loving God allow so much suffering here on earth?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
How did you? I want to ask you about that, and then I also want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. But You talked about how can a kind, loving God allow so much pain, and that is a question that a lot of Christians face from non-believers or people who are searching. How did you answer that question for yourself, or what brought you around on that, or have you answered that question for yourself?
No, I have answered the question. As a matter of fact, I just finished a book on why God allows suffering, and that should be out in sometime in 23. But at that point, I didn't. Right at that point, I was still not a believer. It took my arrest to really that God put people in my path to teach me the gospel, and because I really didn't have any concept of who God was. Right.
Right.
All I saw was Christians out there that were being hypocritical in their actions, and the church is wanting money and all this. So in your mind, you're thinking, oh, it's just a joke. It's no good. But when you really learn what the gospel says, then that changes. And the gospel is so simple that a lot of times people don't present it properly. And it's like many times I was told by other guys, hey, all you got to do is start going to church and then you'll go to heaven. Well, the church has nothing to do with going to heaven,
No.
but that's what I thought. Why do I have to go to church? Yeah. You have to tithe, you have to give money. So it wasn't really brought up to me properly in the past. So that's why I kind of still shied away from him. But so I was basically, I didn't admit it at the time or even acknowledge it, that I was basically a pill addict at that time. And we're coming into 2008 when my mom passed, and that was rough. And then in 2010, my daughter got diagnosed with a severe illness, liver tumors. And that really sent me into they told us that she needed a surgery, and to survive the surgery, it was only going to be a 50% chance to survive. And that really sent me down a dark path and a spiral that I couldn't pull myself out of. And I attempted suicide a couple times. I credit God for saving me, even though I didn't know at the time. I just didn't have the guts to actually pull the trigger, but I sat there with the gun in my mouth, and I couldn't do it. My health was deteriorating. I don't know if you guys can see this, but my hands are all deformed now from this disease. So I had surgery on this one, but this doctors didn't really fix it. They made it worse.
Oh, man. Wow.
I can't zip a zipper. I can't button a button. I can barely tie my shoes. And this was still going back 15 years before my arrest. And my wife had to sew Velcro in my shirts and in my pants. And it was getting a difficult time to manipulate my duty weapon, right? So I really wasn't fit for duty, but my ego and my warrior mentality fought through that and just said, okay, maybe I can get myself shot and killed on duty. That way my family will be taken care of, and I'll have a hero's a funeral,
Mm-hmm.
So I did a lot of dangerous stuff. Even though I was the boss, I was the head of a narcotic task force. And even though I was the boss, I put myself in a lot of dangerous situations, just hoping, something like that would happen. But I never thought about maybe getting shot in the belly or in the spine, leave me in a wheelchair the rest of my life. I didn't think of it that way.
Right.
I told you the flawed thinking that we have when we're going through difficult times, and like you said earlier, everybody's been through a traumatic event. And maybe we shouldn't even say trauma. Maybe we should say overwhelming life event, right? Things happen every day. People are diagnosed with diseases, people going through divorces that are really traumatic because the fight over the kids and losing a job and maybe even financial losses. So everybody, I don't think there's one person I've ever met that hasn't been through something that has really kept them oppressed for a long time. So in this time that I was just a basket case, I was really in a self-destructive mood, and acquaintance of mine was able to, I don't want to say manipulate because it takes the guilt off of me. I made all my decisions. I made all the decisions. I'm not blaming anyone for my decisions, but I was helping a private eye out. He used to be a cop. Then he turned into a private eye. And he always asked for me to do license plates, check license plates from on our computer. check a guy for warrants or criminal histories, and that's illegal. It's illegal for cops to access those things. But his next cop, and most of the guys I know did it, or I don't know if they're still doing it, but that doesn't make it right. I'm just saying that was my mindset, and he was going to bring that forward. He needed some money, and he had a guy that wanted to buy some drugs, and he needed some money. So he convinced me to steal these drugs, methamphetamine, out of the storage locker that we used, and give it to him. And I don't know if it was self-destructive. I don't know if it was adrenaline rush. That really wasn't me, because I've been a cop at that point for over 25 years. But for some reason, I just did it. And again, I made my own decisions. I'm not blaming him at all. I made my own decisions. And basically, when I did it, I gave it to him. I was arrested that next day. So my first drug deal was basically, and I was a narcotic officer for 16 years. If I wanted to sell drugs, I think I could sell drugs without getting caught.
Right.
My mind was just, trauma profoundly changes the way you think. It changes your worldview, your value system. It really plays havoc in the spirit.
Yeah. What you mentioned car accidents and some of the things, like I imagine you've seen all kinds of stuff being in the narcotics division. What are some of the traumatic things that your everyday police officer maybe not even on the narcotic side, but small town officer, what are some of the things that they would face as a traumatic event?
Spousal abuse cases where you go and you respond to let's say a husband beating a wife or girlfriend, and they just beat them to death. And those are the most dangerous calls. I lost 2 friends to shootings on domestic violence cases. They got called to the house. They were walking up the driveway or walkway. The guy jumps out and just shoots and kills them. And these are 2 separate incidents, probably about 20 years apart. But yeah, I lost two friends to that. Traffic accidents are the worst. Like I said, I've taken accidents where children died. I've taken accidents where people were decapitated. I've taken calls of SIDS death, sudden infant death syndrome, where the baby dies in the first 6 months of life in the crib. They call it crib death too. I've had to hold these dead babies in my arms, doing CPR. I've had a toddler die in my arms from drowning. These are the things that just impact every officer. A small, big department. Suicides. I've been to dozens of suicides, and I think that's one of the reasons why I couldn't do it. Some were successful. In other words, some were really horrific, where the scene, I don't want to describe it here, but the scene was just horrific. And others where they couldn't do it right, and they survived, but their face was just, horribly disfigured. And I think seeing those horribly disfigured attempts, I think that was one of the things that kind of stopped me from doing it, which I believe God put those thoughts in my head. But those are things that everyday cops go through. Nowadays, when people hate cops, I believe that there's a lot of people now that really hate cops. I think that alone is difficult to take, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about that. Officers often do get a bad rap. Some deserve it, some not. And as a non-officer, it's hard to tell good from bad, any of that. And I know probably 99% are the good officers. But do you think that the trauma that you face on a day-to-day basis, the hardening of the emotions, everything that you see and go through, does that maybe play into some of the interactions that officers have with people and contribute to the bad rap that officers get?
I believe so. Yeah. During my career, I've met a couple of racist officers, but most of them, like you said, 99% of these guys are great people. The problem becomes when you're working a certain cultural, a certain demographics in an area and you see violence on a daily basis, and not necessarily toward the police, but towards each other. You know, there gang activity, drug dealing, people getting shot and killed, and drive-by shootings. What happens is, yeah, the trauma builds up because you're not letting it out, right? And what happens is they begin to judge a certain culture of being extra violent, you know, and not
Mm,
necessarily racist, but if you see white people shooting each other every day, you're going to be very careful when you see a white person that seems to be acting suspicious. And I believe in my heart that this is what's happening with all these shootings of people that are unarmed. I think they jump the gun a little bit, but because of all the stuff they've witnessed, all the stuff they've seen, I don't want to say they're scared, and that's not really the term that's going to be proper, but they're more suspicious, right? And everybody in their mind has got this line, okay, if he does this, if he pulls his hand, you know, out of his pocket and he's got something in his hand, I'm going to have to deal with what I have to deal with, not knowing what it is. Could be a cell phone, it
right.
could be a gun. And that's how I believe these things happen. Now, there are definitely a lot of racial incidents where you see a few or even just one officer beating on a suspect that's defenseless on the ground. And that's, I don't know about that, because I see that in the news a lot, where even officers fighting themselves. You know, there was one where an officer was going to punch a girl, another female cop. So I can't really talk about that, but that's out of line, and that's probably a severe anger issue, and the anger could also be a result of the PTSD too. But,
Right.
but that's my take on it. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. I know I have never shot anybody, but I know a lot of people that have. I know a few people that have actually had to kill somebody. They were all definitely legitimate shootings. There are shootings that are not legitimate, where the guy jumps the gun or shoots the guy when he's not even a danger. But I believe that majority of these things are related to the trauma, because we don't deal with it, right? We're afraid to, because we're afraid what our peers will think. They'll think that we're weak and we're, you know, not really fit for duty anymore.
Right. Have you seen that culture shift at all, where if somebody is dealing with some issues or has some emotional things they need to work through or some traumatic experiences, has that culture changed at all since your time?
Well, I've been out of it now for about 13 years. And I hear from guys that are working now that it has not. However, you hear from the police department administrations all over the place in the rural areas, as well as you know, San Francisco, Oakland, all that they are trying to take care of the officers. But when you have a job, like even like firemen, you have to be tough. You have to have a warrior mentality, and you have to be able to handle business, right? So in that case, it's very difficult to tell an officer, hey, you need to be in touch with your feelings, when he might be subject to somebody drawing a gun on him, or just attacking him. I've been attacked just standing there talking to somebody. All of a sudden, the guy just goes crazy and attacks you. So there's a fine line. I don't have the answer. I wish I did. I don't have any suggestions. I wish I did, because if you change the culture, you might put officers more at risk. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? I mean, if they're getting in touch with their emotions, and they're crying it out like they should be doing, they might lose some of their edge. So
Right.
it is a fine line, right?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
what I'd like to,
I can see from both sides how that would be a hard line to walk, because as an officer, you don't want to, even if the space is there for you to be able to take some time, you know, take a week to work through something. You you know, I'm sure the head of police doesn't want to put people out there like that has some issues, for fear he might, who knows what, and he doesn't want to not be on the job when he went out there to protect and serve the people. So I can see how that would be a hard line to walk from both parties.
Yeah, and the administrations, they all want their officers on the street. So if you should get into some critical event and you ask for time off, they're very hesitant to give it because you're a hole. It's a hole on the street, right? You have to plug that with an officer on overtime, and then the overtime budgets. It's a lot more complicated than a lot of people try to make it out to be. Like defunding the police. That's not going to help. We need more training. I see what they're saying, and I agree that maybe mental health professionals should be available. But I know there's some cities out here in the Bay Area that are putting these psychologists on the street, and they're responding to calls. Well, we've had in the cities that I've worked, we've had mentally ill people just attack officers for no reason because of the mental illness, right? So the first psychologist that gets injured or killed, that's going to stop too. So
right.
There's a fine line. I just don't know where it is. All I know is that what we should be doing is we should be allowing the officers not to suffer any repercussions by seeking help. And that's where I think the church can do a huge service to the communities, because if they saw me going into a psychiatrist's office, obviously they would know what I'm doing. But if I went to the church and spoke to a Christian counselor there, they might just think I'm just going to church, right? So that's why I ended up writing this book, was because I feel that the churches should be more involved with it.
Have you seen any progress on that front with reaching out to churches and developing some kind of programs to help their local police departments?
Well, I've been trying, but the churches are they're already staffed and they're already have their policies and procedures down. So it's like a battleship, right? Or a big giant ship. It takes a long time to turn. It's just like police departments. They're talking about the right things, but in actually implementing them is a little bit different because it takes a long time to shift attitudes.
There's a lot of cogs in the machine.
Right. But what I do see, which is really positive, even the police departments that I've worked in the past, that we never had chaplains, that now they all have chaplains working there. And these are non-denominational chaplains. So if you're a non-believer, that's cool. If you're a Muslim, that's cool. Buddhist, whatever. The chaplains will there to talk to you, at least to give a place to vent, right? And I think that's a great help. And these chaplains are doing a phenomenal job. It's very tough to earn the trust of anybody in that culture, because tend not to trust anybody.
Right. You mentioned your daughter being diagnosed with an illness. Did that time coincide with God getting a hold of you, or kind of?
No, that was part of the downfall. So it was a few months after that where I got arrested. So God worked. The arrest was the best thing that happened in my life, because after my arrest, I bailed out and I went home. There was a pastor named Jeff Kinney who ran a church out here, and he got my number from a friend of a friend. And he calls me one night, and again, I'm not a believer. So when he said, "My name is Pastor Jeff," I just kind of like, yeah. I didn't say it, but yeah. What do you want? So he said, "Hey, I heard about what happened, and I'm opening my church doors up to you. We do counseling here if you need it. And I just wanted to let you know that you have a home here if you want it." And I didn't believe it. So I'm like, yeah. No thanks, but I appreciate the call. So this is what he does. He goes, "Well, before I hang up, can I please pray for you?" Yeah, I said yes, but in my mind, I'm saying, yeah, go ahead and knock yourself out. I'm being really sarcastic, but my mom taught me to be real nice. So he prays the sinner's prayer, and I didn't know what the sinner's prayer was. And so when he finished it, he said, "Do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior?" And I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, well, this is where my church is at. If you want to come, you're welcome at any time." So I hung up. I went back on the couch and sat with my wife, and she looks at me and says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, nothing's wrong." She goes, well, something seems strange. And then I started to think about it. It was almost like there was a weight lifted off my shoulders, right? It wasn't like this phenomenal thing that just happened. It was like, I felt better, just a little bit better. So my wife said, hey, why don't we just go to church? Maybe that's what's missing out of our lives. She grew up a Christian too, so she was a believer. So we went to the church. It was phenomenal. Everybody just welcomed us with open arms, and it was just really strange. But I loved it there. I ended up becoming a church member there, and he taught me how to pray. And it was during one church sermon on Sunday, he just stopped in the middle of the sermon and said, I think God's calling me to pray for Norm and his daughter. And so he stops, he asks the congregation to pray with him, and he prays for healing for my daughter. And the next week, just so happened, as we went to do a biopsy, they said, okay, we got to do a biopsy before we do the operation. They did the biopsy, everything went well. A couple weeks later, we go to the doctor, and the doctor couldn't believe it. He goes, well, it's normal liver tissue. I can't, the tumors are gone. I don't know how to explain it. And I got real mad at first, thinking, okay, this is what caused my downfall. And he said, no, he showed me the scans. He showed me the newest scan. He showed me the UCLA Medical Center's supplemental reports. And at that point right there, I truly believed in God. I felt like, God healed her, and there's just no other explanation. And that was the start of my relationship with God, because then I truly believed. And so I kept going to church. I was out on bail for 2 years. And when I finally pled guilty to the charges and I got sentenced to 14 years in federal prison, they shipped me out to Fort Worth, Texas. And I was so angry that they sent me to Fort Worth, because I'm in California. I go, how is my family going to visit me? Where am I going to get the money to have them come out? But in Fort Worth, the next day, after I got there, I went to the chapel, ended up getting a job at the chapel, ended up finding out that they had a seminary coming in, Tyndale Seminary. So I ended up going to seminary there and ended up getting my master's degree in theology and counseling. And I went on later to get my doctorate in Christian counseling through the seminary. And I was able to, the chaplain there was allowed me and another guy to help counsel some of the other inmates that he didn't really want to deal with, And that's where I kind of learned how God heals, because I started studying the Bible on healing. And that's why I wrote this book. But after my daughter was healed, it was just phenomenal. I mean, that set me on fire. And after about less than a year of really working on biblical scripture and praying and doing the things that promote healing, God healed me of my PTSD too. I haven't had a PTSD symptom now for almost 10 years.
Wow.
It's been phenomenal. Yeah, it's just and that's why I wanted to put out this book, because the Bible spells it out, right? The Bible is our owner's manual that we can go to. But the problem is a lot of times we read the Bible academically, but you got to read it with your heart, right? You have to look at it and go, okay, how does this scripture relate to me? Does this teach me anything? Does it show me anything? And it does, right? When you're going through difficult times, it says in Corinthians that when you go through tough times and God helps you through it, you're expected to help others that are going through similar things, And then I started taking alcohol and drug addiction classes, and to get ready to get a certificate. And I found that the biblical principles and secular principles are the same. They just have different terminology, right? CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the same thing Paul says in Corinthians, where he says, take every thought captive to Jesus. In other words, if the thought that you're having coincides with the Bible, that's good. But if the thought that you're having is from the devil, like, you're no good, your dad says you're no good, so you're no good, you got to reject that. That's CBT. It's just changing your behavior. And so I ended up getting my license. And right now I'm working as a drug addiction counselor at a men's facility. And I'm also working as a chaplain. And I just, people don't believe me when I say that if God were to come down right now and say, hey, well, let's do a do-over and I'll take away all the prison stuff, because I was in prison 8.5 years, and you won't have to do that, I would turn it down, because I learned so much about people. If I would have just retired as a cop, I would have been angry, isolating, maybe even alcoholic, and I'm not saying that all the retired guys are that way, but it's the job that makes you hate people. It's a job that makes you, isolate yourself from others, us versus them, the good versus the bad.
Right.
And I'm a much better person now. My kids like me a lot more now than who I was, 12 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
So,
it's incredible. It's incredible what can change and what God can make out of the mess that we make out of ourselves. But to what you said, like not you wouldn't go through those things willingly again, but looking back, you wouldn't change it, because those events make us who we are. They allow you a perspective, and now God's giving you a mission to reach people that are in a similar position as you. So that's beautiful. I would ask, what was prison like as a former police officer?
Well, the first year I was in a suicide cell for the whole year, and that was horrific. I wouldn't want my worst enemy to be isolated and caged like that. But it was my wife that basically said that I was suicidal, and I was. I mean, I can't deny that I wasn't. So the first year I was kept inside. So then I had to sign a bunch of paperwork saying that I acknowledged that I could be killed on the yard, and I subject to all these different laws. And so no, I signed my rights away and basically went into general population. And there was several guys that tried to give me a hard time, but I just said, hey, in prison you really have to affiliate with a gang. If you don't, you're open for harassment. But my gang was the church, right? So I said, hey, listen, I'm identifying as a Christian. I'm at the church. I'm neutral. I don't want to get involved in any of your stuff, in anybody else's stuff, and if you need help with anything, I'm there to help you. So most of the people left me alone. Some of the people wanted case advice, right? Hey, the cops did this, the cops did that. Did they do the right thing? So it wasn't really too bad for me, to be honest. It really wasn't too bad. It was just, jail is horrible. I mean, it's just, I thought that when you went to prison, they taught you skills. They worked with you to get an education. It's just a warehouse. It's like the forklift comes, they put you up on the shelf, and that's it. You're done. And if you're weak, if you got money and you're able to be preyed on, there's guys that are victimized every day there, and it's a real shame. And the guards don't seem to care. The guards are basically the same as cops, right? Hey, you're a bad guy, you deserve what you get. And there is a little bit of truth to that, but not when it comes to being a victim again, right? I mean, you're paying your dues. You're in prison. You're away from your family. Your freedoms are taken away. That doesn't mean you still have to be a victim,
Right.
And the hospital system there is horrible. Praise God. God stayed with me. I didn't have one blister or ulcer on the bottom of my feet for the entire time. When I got back home, I did. And I was in a cast for a long time when I got home. But God kept me healthy there.
Wow.
And but I know people that lost their legs, they lost arms and stuff for infections that the COs, the guards, wouldn't take you to the hospital, And then when they finally do take you to the hospital, the doctor said, yeah, if you would have been here 6 weeks earlier, we could have saved this leg. And but that's the way it is. They treat you really bad. I mean, out here in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's just 3 federal prison guards, and the warden just got arrested for raping the females in the prison. So they're going to prison now. But that's what happens, and I don't know if that's related to trauma, because these guys see some bad stuff too. I mean, I've seen some stabbings and stuff that I could imagine the guards go through. but like I said, it's for me, it wasn't all that bad. So I can't complain how horrible it was.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned being healed from your trauma. Was that while you were in prison,
Yeah.
doing some of the trainings and all of that? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, when I bailed out, I started going to psychiatrists. Actually, I went to a phenomenal psychiatrist that was a police officer, and he when he retired, he became a police psychologist, so that you really got to know what the people go through. And he gave me a lot. He saved my life. He gave me a lot of coping skills to manage the panic and anxiety. Excuse me, panic and anxiety attacks. But there's no healing. And so when I went to prison, I went every week to a psychologist and a psychiatrist there too. And they tried to give me anti-anxiety meds, and I didn't want to take any of that stuff. But when I actually studied what the Bible says about it, in other words, it's a spiritual cleansing. That's really the easiest way to call it. Sin plays havoc in our lives, right? That's why God hates sin. I think Paul says it best when the spirit and your body's spirit, so the spirit of the world and your spirit clash inside. It's a war inside you. So I like to describe it as, that there's a red light in your car's dashboard that warns you of pending disaster, right? Something's going to break. So the way I see it is our negative emotions, our resentment, our anger, our lashing out at people, things like this is a warning signal by God sent to you saying, hey, you have unresolved issues. You really need to deal with these issues. And if you ignore that, then it just gets, the pain gets deeper and more extended. And the sin inside of us, because how we deal with our trauma is normally sinful. It's very rarely is it positive. So what I'm talking about is addictions, right? So we'll go drink some alcohol to feel better, right? Or we'll take some pills or methamphetamine or whatever it is, gambling, dangerous sex, all these things make us feel better temporarily. But what we're doing is we're trying to numb an inward spiritual issue with outside sources, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we go into figuring out the root cause, and that's what my book's about, is to go back to the root cause. Was it childhood issues? Was it abandonment? Was it abuse? Or was it later on? Maybe it was a traumatic event later on that's keeping us in our pain. And if we deal with it from God's perspective, in other words, confessing and repenting for the sins that we. So in other words, if I were to start drinking, and it's not a sin to drink, but it's a sin to be drunk and to not feel your emotions. God gave you emotions for a purpose. If you're numbing them and not feeling them, then that's a sin. So when you acknowledge the sin and you confess it and repent it, you're basically cleaning up your side of the street. You got to forgive the people that harmed you or that you perceive harmed you. You got to ask for forgiveness of the people that you've harmed. This is all part. And once you start peeling this onion layer and getting down to the root cause, that's when your life changes, and the Holy Spirit just changes you from the inside out. Not like secular counseling, who they don't have a spiritual component. They just say, okay, well, if you start changing your behavior, pretty soon you'll be changing your thought patterns. And that's true if you can do it, right? But like at the addiction center where I am, all of the guys in there have had prior trauma. I mean, some of it's so severe that it really takes a long, long time to change their behavior. But it's not a Christian based place. It's a secular based place. And I'm not really allowed to teach what God says. But if we could just clean up all our sins, and because the sin separates us from God. And once we get back into fellowship with him, that's when the healing and the peace and joy return to your life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love hearing when people say that. You don't often hear that coming out of enough people's mouths these days. Like it's the world has gone very secular, and it is all about what's within you. The power is inside you. You have everything inside you that you need. And to a certain extent, God has given us everything we need, but we have to bring him along. We have to bring him in, and he's the main part of your life. Like, he's given us what we need to live life, to do life, but it's so much better, so much easier, and it's actually fulfilling our purpose when we're walking step by step with him. So that's beautiful. I had to think when you mentioned, working with the secular counselors or at that institution. Have you gone down the road of maybe working at a Christian counseling institution? Or I know you had mentioned you got I think you said your Christian counselor's degree, or I don't remember exactly what you called it. What are you doing in there to be able to actually bring your faith into some of the counseling that you do?
Okay, I've only been free now from prison for a couple of years.
Right.
So
Okay.
I joined a church, and what I'm doing now is I'm doing small groups. So
Gotcha.
I do the trauma healing for small groups. You kind of have to prove yourself a little bit before they just, hey, come on in and counsel people. You're a felon? Sure, come on in. We don't care. No, you have to prove that you've changed your life. You have to show that you're willing to really follow God, right? So I'm working
that's
on
understandable.
Yeah. So with the book, I wrote also a small group guide. So we could do small groups can do it without me, right? And it's all centered. Everything is Christ centered. And so I'm volunteering and doing as much as I can just to prove that I'm not the person that, people assume, because people assume when they hear, oh yeah, he's been in prison. Oh, they go, oh my gosh, that guy, stay away from him.
Probably murdered 50 people.
Yeah. So in like the police culture, I have a few friends that know who I was, so that they know that something happened, because that what I did, my crime wasn't me, right? I mean, I've been battling narcotics for I was a narc for 16 years, but most of my career I've been into arresting narcotics offenders. But all of a sudden, this happened. But the majority of the cops, they're so judgmental, and so they judge me as a criminal. They judge me as a piece of crap. And so it's going to take a while for me to really get back into that community, because I really would love to at some point be a police or fire chaplain, because I know what they go through. I know what they see on a daily basis. And I believe in my heart that I could be a huge help. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I know what they're going through. So I know what to look for, when you see someone that's not acting right, you know what to look for. But they're not accepting me. The police department say, oh, you got a felony, you can't work here. The guys are saying, that guy's a scumbag, he's a crook. And so, maybe in 5 years or so, things will change. I don't know what will happen in my life at that time, but that's really what I'd really like to do is do some kind of first responder ministry. And that's why I like to talk, and I like to get the word out, because it's a very difficult job. I mean, you have to have the patience of a pastor, you have to have the stamina of an athlete, and you have to have the knowledge of a judge, right? You have to know all these things, and then all these decisions have to be made in a split second. I mean, really a split second, and it's very, very difficult. And then when they do make mistakes, man, the world collapses around them. And it's a shame. It really is, because cops and firemen, it's not just a career, it's your identity, and that's what makes it the worst thing is it's your entire identity. And when your identity is taken away from you and you're hopeless, that's a for disaster. That's when suicidal ideation comes in and stuff. So that's what I'd like to try to do. But I'm content right now with just helping people who just suffered everyday trauma like, everybody else does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hadn't realized that it was that recent that you had come out of prison. I wasn't trying to insinuate that you should be doing something. Yeah, but no, that's awesome. Like I love seeing that you are pushing to helping that demographic. I would love to see you be able to get into that. And I think given time, God, you follow God, allow him to work through that. He'll open those doors for you.
Yeah, maybe it's not God's plan. He might have something else for me. And that's what I've learned. And I think that's the great thing about believing in God and trusting in him is that when you do so, it takes the life stresses off of you. Every day there's something that's happening in our lives, right? And normal people, what we do is we stress about it. Oh my gosh, there's rumors going around that we're being fired. So they stress out for months. Just give it to God. I mean, you just keep doing your best job at work, but if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If God wants me to lose this job, it's going to happen, and we're not going to be. You see what I'm saying is you just release it. You can give. Jesus says, "Give me all your anxiety, all your worries. I'll carry it for you." And, that's the greatest thing about believing in a God, and that's why AA is so successful, is because it has a spiritual component. You have to give yourself over to, they say now, higher power, but you have to give yourself over to God. And once you do, man, the peace and joy. I was in an emotional prison before I even went to prison, right? I hated myself, I hated life, I hated everything. It took prison to bring me out of that prison. And now I have the peace that I never, ever believed that I could achieve. Right. And it's all God.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting how you mentioned that, or they call it a higher power and all that? It's interesting, seeing all of these, whether they be psychiatrists or coaches or whatever kinds of organizations in their attempt, or I mean, I say not attempt, but they deliberately avoid all things God, but they still, in a roundabout way, everything comes back to spiritual, higher powers, a powerful being, but they do everything they can to not bring God into it. And that, I don't know, it baffles me. The only thing I can think of is that there's something else, the enemy is out there holding them back from that.
That's true. And that's what it says. That's what Paul says, right? Is that the enemy blinds us to the simplicity of the gospel. And it's only God that can reveal that, right? And that's why it's your job. And this is why I'm grateful to you to put out there, hey, God heals, God does this, God does that. Because every time we plant the seed, and they start becoming curious more about God, then God will unveil that. Like I said, the gospel is so simple that your sins are forgiven. All you got to do is ask. Just the relief of all that stress of guilt and shame for the stuff that we do every day, right? I'm not talking about criminal activity. I'm just talking about the hate, the gossip, the just treating each other horribly. I mean, especially in this political world right now, everybody hates everybody. And it's just so funny that both sides claim God, but nobody acts like it. Nobody acts like they've read the Bible. It's
right,
crazy.
Exactly. That's so true. Norm, what piece of advice would you leave us with tonight?
Be open and honest with your family. So if you're going through something difficult, don't keep it a secret. I did that, and when you keep things secret, it'll eventually come out. And when it does come out, it could come out explosive. So in other words, if I would have just talked to my family, hey, I'm not going to give you the details of what happened today, but I'm a little bit stressed and I just need a little bit of time. And, let's do something afterwards that's family oriented. Because if you keep it in, like whenever I came home from work, even if I had the worst horrific day, my wife would say, hey, how was work? Oh, fine. No, nothing happened. No, I mean, it's just crazy what we do. So be open and honest. Talk about the stuff that's going on in your life with somebody that you can trust. And if you have nobody at all to trust, journal. Journal is the next best thing. And I know a lot of men go, I don't want to have a diary. It's really not. It's just putting your thoughts on paper, because a lot of times when we go through rough times, our brain doesn't process these events. And if the brain is not allowed to process these things and move the event into the long-term memory, what happens is this reoccurring thoughts come all the time, these flashbacks or nightmares. And journaling is really, really good to get your mind and body to process these events. But number one thing is just to talk to somebody. Don't keep it in.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Journaling is a habit that I'm working on building.
It's tough, right? Because men don't grow up with diary and stuff. But
right,
I'm telling you, it's and then do a prayer journal. It's the same journal, but because if you say a prayer and you ask for something, a month later you go back and you look, and you could see how many of the things that you prayed for actually came true. And that builds faith in God. That builds trust in God, And the more you trust, the more you can release your life to Him, the more you don't have to stress about things. Because we always stress over stuff, and then the things we stress about never happens. It's just funny. You go, wow, I stressed for months over that. Why did I do that? Because you didn't have trust.
I heard someone say once, I stressed out over, or 90% of the things I stress out about don't happen. So that means it works, right?
That means it works.
Right. Where can people find you and keep up with the release of your book so they can go buy their own copy?
My website is Christ-centeredhealing.com, Christ-centeredhealing.com. And I'm on Facebook at the same name. And you can have links to the book there. There's some videos. I haven't really been keeping up with them, but a lot of prayers are on there too. If you want some healing prayers, you can download them in Word, where you can personalize them to yourself, about anxiety, about trauma, about forgiveness, all kinds of prayers on there.
Awesome. I will drop those links in the show notes. I really appreciate you joining me tonight. It's been a fun conversation.
It has. Thank you. Thank you for getting out the word. God bless.
Yes, sir.